The Mishnah in Maseches Avos in Perek Dalet Mishnah Aleph. Ezu Chacham, who is considered wise? Halomeid Mikol Adam, someone who learns from all men. Shene'emar Mikol Lamdai Iskalti, from all those who I learned from, I have gained insight. Ezu Gibor, who is considered strong? Hakovesh es Yitzro, the one who conquers his inclinations and impulses. Ezu Ashir, who is considered rich? Hasameach bechelko, one who rejoices with his portion. Ezu Mechubad, who is considered honorable? Hamechabed es habrios, someone who gives honor to humanity. We're approaching now the holiday of Purim, and a very unique phenomenon with this holiday is that there are multiple dates on which this holiday can be celebrated. The two primary dates, as we all know, are the 14th of Adar and the 15th of Adar. The Mishnah in the beginning of Maseches Megillah tells us that the default day to read the Megillah is the 14th of Adar, and if a person finds themselves in a city that is a walled city, they read on the 15th of Adar. But this walled city has a very specific definition. This is not a city that happens to have a wall right now, but rather had a wall at a very, very specific time in history. As the Mishnah says, Krochim hamukafin choma mimos Yehoshua ben Nun, the cities that were surrounded by a wall in the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, Koren b'chamisha asa, they read on the 15th. Charim ba'ayaros gedolos, and townships and other cities, Koren ba'arba asar, they read on the 14th. The Rambam in Hilchos Megillah, in Perek Aleph, Halacha Daled, he codifies this for us, and the Rambam uses very interesting language in describing this halacha. The Rambam says the following: Ezu zman kriyasa, what is the time of reading the Megillah? Zmanim harbe tiknu chachamim, the sages enacted more than one date for when the Megillah is read. And says the Rambam, Kol Medina, any city, that had a wall surrounding it in the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz, whether inside the land or outside the land, even though it does not currently have a wall, koren b'tesvav ba'adar, they read on the 15th of Adar. And says the Rambam, why is it that the Chachamim, that the sages of that time in history, decided to make this the cutoff point? That if the city had a wall in the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, so they read on Tesvav, even if later on it did not have a wall. And conversely, if the city did not have a wall at that time in history, even though it had a wall later in history and even continues to have a wall, it does not read on the 15th, rather on the 14th, like everyone else. So says the Rambam, Belama Talu Hadavar B'Yimei Yehoshua. Why is this dependent on the days of Yehoshua? Kidei lachluch kavod la'eretz Yisrael, in order to give honor to the land of Israel. Shahisa chareva ba'oso hazman, because the land of Israel was destroyed in a state of complete desolation at that time. This was a few decades after the Babylonian conquest. The entire land was in a state of complete desolation. Kidei shiyu koren kivnei Shushan, that they should read like the inhabitants of Shushan, which was the epicenter of the events during the actual Purim story. And it will be as if they are cities that have a wall. It is as if they are right now cities that have a wall. Even though right now they are destroyed. Since at the time of Yehoshua, they did have a wall. So what the Rambam is telling us, very interestingly, is that if the cities had a wall at the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, it is as if they have a wall right now, meaning the enactment of the sages of the time of the Purim story was kind of a inverted enactment, we can say. The enactment was that all walled cities read on the same day that the inhabitants of Shushan read. Since the war in Shushan, as we read in the Megillah, the war took an extra day in Shushan itself, so the celebration was pushed off a day, and therefore the primary celebration was on Tesvav for the inhabitants of Shushan. So all other cities that also have a wall should also celebrate on the same day of Shushan. However, what is the definition of a city that has a wall? Not a city that has a wall currently, but rather a city that had a wall at the time of Yehoshua. And if they had a wall at the time of Yehoshua, nechshav ki'ilu achshav he mukafin choma. It's as if they right now have a wall. This is a very interesting formulation of this law. Because they had a wall at the time of Yehoshua, it is as if now they have a wall. What this is, it's not just hinting to, what this is basically telling us explicitly, is that in a very powerful way, the celebrating of the events of Purim is a throwback to the events of Yehoshua ben Nun. If the city had a wall at the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, then it is as if it has a wall right now. It is reliving the reality of Yehoshua ben Nun. The Yerushalmi in Maseches Megillah, in Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, draws an interesting parallel between the definitions of the cities that are already laid out in the Megillah and the definitions of a city that are alluded to in the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Rabbi Yehuda bar Pazi Dorash, prozei prozos. He draws an equation between the word prozim and prozos that are used in different places in the Tanakh. Prozim, referring to cities that are walled cities that read on the 15th. These are described in the Megillah itself as arei prozim, cities that are walled. And in Sefer Devarim, Perek Gimel, Nemar lahalon, levad me'arei haprazi harbe ma'od. In addition to the walled cities that you inherited. This is Moshe Rabbeinu delivering his farewell speech to the Jewish people right before the Jewish people are about to enter the land. Ma lahalon mimos Yehoshua ben Nun. Those arei prazim that are being referred to by Moshe Rabbeinu are in the days of Yehoshua ben Nun, because again, this is right before the Jewish people enter the land, being led by Yehoshua. Af prazos shene'emar kan, also the prazos, the walled cities that are referred to in the book of Esther, mimos Yehoshua ben Nun. These are referring to only the walled cities that were walled at the time of Yehoshua. So again, highlighting this idea that the walled cities already being referred to in the book of Esther are already drawing this connection and even alluding to the walled cities that were at the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. If we think about this connection, that the celebrating of Purim is meant to be, in a way, some type of a throwback to the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, this raises a very powerful question. Because if you think about it, the time of Yehoshua ben Nun and the time of the events of Purim were polar opposites of each other in terms of the state of the Jewish people. The time of Yehoshua ben Nun, the Jewish people were a conquering nation, entering the land, gaining their sovereignty, building up the land. The time of Esther, all that was completely negated. In fact, one could say that the situation of the Jewish people at the time of Purim was the undoing of everything that Yehoshua had done. Yehoshua brought the people into the land, gave them sovereignty, and at the time of Esther, the Jewish people were exiled from the land. The entire land was destroyed. They had no sovereignty. Indeed, the Gemara tells us that one of the reasons why we don't say Hallel on Purim is because the Jewish people lacked sovereignty. The opening pasuk of Hallel is Hallelu Avdei Hashem. Right? The servants of God will praise Him. Right? Akati Avdei Achashverosh Onan. How could we say we are the servants of God when we are still the slaves of Achashverosh? Right? It's impossible to fully commit yourself to the service of God when you lack this sovereignty, when you're still the slaves of a foreign entity. So the state of the Jewish people in Esther was literally the polar opposite of the state of the Jewish people in Yehoshua. So this begs the question: what exactly is this connection that we're being told? That not only is there a connection in terms of definitions of what is considered a walled city and what's considered not a walled city, but that in a very explicit way, our acting out of this law is meant to be a throwback to the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, as if we are reliving the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. So I want to share with everyone something that I think is just truly remarkable. If we look in Sefer Yehoshua, there are several instances where there are references that are made that the author of the Megillah would hone in on to highlight the main takeaways, let's say, from the events of the Megillah. The pasuk in Sefer Yehoshua in Perek Chaf Aleph, pasuk Mem Aleph. The context of this parak is that this is the wrapping up of the dividing of the land, which comes after the conquest of the land. So we had 7 years of conquest and 7 years of dividing up the land. And after all of that has been finished, right, Yeshua's crowning achievement, he brought the people into the land, fought the wars successfully, divided up the land successfully. Vayitein Adonai Yisrael et kol haaretz. God gave the land to the Jewish people, right, the entire land. Asher nishbal aseis la'avosam, that He had commanded to give to their forefathers. Vayiroshua, and they inherited it. Vayishvuva, and they dwelled within it. Vayonach Adonai la'em misaviv, and God quelled all of their enemies surrounding them. Kechol asher nishba la'avosam, as He had sworn to their forefathers. V'lo amad ish bifneim, and no man stood before them. Mikol oiveim, as kol oiveim nasan Adonai bi'adan. From all of their enemies, God put them in their hands, into the hands of the Jewish people. Lo nafal davar mikol hadavar atov, which literally means nothing had fallen. In context, it means nothing was lacking. Mikol hadavar atov, of all of the good, asher diber Adonai el beis Yisrael hakol ba, all of the good that God had spoken to do for the Jewish people, that He would guide them through the desert, that He would bring them into the land, that He would conquer their enemies, that He would let them dwell in the land successfully. All of that had come to fruition. Nothing was lacking. Lo nafal davar. Now, this term, as we just said, this is a very, very unique term to describe nothing is missing. If you give a list of things and you say nothing from this list is missing, everything has come to fruition, everything has been actualized. But indeed, Yehoshua uses this term again twice in his farewell speech to the Jewish people. Right, just a few chapters later. I am leaving you now. I'm going to leave this world. Ki lo nofal davar echad mikol advarim hatovim asher diber Adonai Elohechem aleichem. From all the good that God has spoken on you to do for you. Hakol ba'u lachem, all has come. Lo nofal mimenu davar echad. None of those things have fallen. Again, this strange terminology that is used not twice, but 3 times, not just by the narrator, but by Yehoshua himself when he's describing the situation to the Jewish people. In these verses that we read from the very end of Perek Chaf Aleph of chapter 21, there are 3 very powerful references to the events of the Megillah. First off, Vayonach Adonai Elohem misaviv, God quelled their enemies surrounding them, as an explicit reference to the state of the Jewish people in vis-a-vis the war that the Jewish people must fight against the Amalekites. As we will read on Shabbos Zachar from the Psukim in Parshas Ki Teitzei, V'haya b'haniach Adonai Elohecha mikol oivecha misaviv, when God quells the enemies surrounding you. Timche es zecher Amalek, this will be the opportunity for you to gain vengeance against the Amalekites. Next reference, Velo Amad Ish Bifnehem. As a result of the military success of the Jewish people in the land in the time of Yehoshua, there was such awe and trepidation that no man stood before them. Velo Amad Ish Bifnehem. This is almost a copy-paste from the description at the end of another war in history, at the end of the war that took place at the end of the Megillah story. Nikalu Ayudim Ba'areim, all of the Jews throughout the kingdom, they gathered in their cities to attack those who had sought ill against them. V'ish lo omad lifnehem, and no man stood before them. Kinofal pachdam al kol ha'amim, because their terror had fallen amongst all the nations. Lo omad ish lifnehem, v'ish lo amad bifnehem, as it says in Sefer Yehoshua. The final reference, lo nafal davar. Again, this strange language describing how God's promises to the Jewish people. He gave this long list of promises that He would lead them to the desert successfully and take care of them and ensure that the war's waged against their enemies would be successful. The strange language, lo nafal davar. Lo nafal davar, Rabbosai, is an explicit reference to the turning point of the Megillah. As we know, the turning point of the Megillah, Balayla Ahu Nadadosh and Asa Melech, that there was a night where the king was having trouble sleeping, and he asks for the chronicles to be read before him, and he finds out that his ally Mordechai had foiled an assassination plot against him, and that nothing had been done to repay his kindness. And at that moment, Haman walks in order to deliver his plan to kill said Mordechai. And Achashverosh asks him, what should I do for someone who I want to honor, for someone who I want to elevate his status? Vayomer Haman b'libo, and Haman, in his solipsistic state of mind that he always seems to find himself in, right? Vayomer Haman b'libo, lemi yachpotz hamelech la'asos yikar yoser mimeni. How could it be that the king would want to do honor to anyone more than me? So he describes this grand scene that the person should be given the royal garments and the crown and the horse of the king and paraded through the city. To which Achashverosh he responds, Maher, quick, kach sasus ves halavush, take the horse and all the royal garments that you just described. Va'asei kain leMordechai haYehudi hayoshev b'shar hamelech. Do this to Mordechai the Jew that sits in the gate of the king. Al tapel davar. Do not let anything fall. Mikol asher dibarta, from everything that you had just said. All of the little details that you just said about the horse and the clothes and the crown and the parading through the city. Al tapel davar. Make sure nothing is left off that list. Nothing. Make sure everything comes to fruition. This fascinating set of parallels does not end here. This one you kind of have to see for yourself, kind of visually. This is at the end of Perek Yud Beis in Sefer Yehoshua. This is at the conclusion of all of the successful campaigns to vanquish the Canaanite kings from the land. Ve'ela malchei haaretz asher hikol Yehoshua u'bnei Yisrael. These are the list of kings that Yehoshua and the Jewish people vanquished. Be'ever hayardein, beyond the Jordan. Yama mibal Gad, bibikas halavonon, in the valleys. Ve'al har, and on the mountains. Ve'hashvela, and on the coastal plain. Bahar v'ashvela v'arava, and in the desert, so that everyone can see. This is a long list of the 31 kings that were vanquished by Yehoshua and the Jewish people during the 7-year long campaign. People that are a little bit familiar with the structure of the Megillah as it's traditionally written will be familiar with the Aseres B'nai Haman. Again, at the end of the war, we are given a list of all of the vanquished enemies of the Jewish people. To the best of my knowledge, there's only 2 places in the Tanakh, the entire Tanakh, where it gives a comprehensive list of enemies vanquished by the Jewish people in a particular event. And they happen to be in Sefer Yehoshua and in Sefer Esther. And in both places, they happen to be listed in this very unique sheer format with these 2 parallel columns written side by side. It's unbelievable. The author of the Megillah was making explicit references to the state of the Jewish people in the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. And in a way, this only highlights our question, because as we pointed out, the time of Yehoshua ben Nun was literally the polar opposite of the state of the Jewish people in the time of Esther. And I believe that there is a deep lesson being given over here. That the qualities of Malchus, of kingship, of the Jewish people, that were gained in the time of Yehoshua ben Nun are not circumstantial. They are not dependent on whatever circumstances the Jewish people happen to find themselves in at the present moment. Because even if Eretz Yisrael Chareva, as the Rambam says, the land of Israel is destroyed, and there is no Malchus in the Jewish people, and the people are Mefuzar and Mefurad ben Ha'amim, they're scattered and dispersed among the nations, as Haman describes them. He correctly describes them that way. Even if the circumstances of the Jewish people are not in a state of sovereignty, they possess the inherent qualities of sovereignty. Those qualities are always there regardless of circumstances. And they express those qualities in whatever circumstances they happen to find themselves in. Chazal make a very powerful comment in the Bavli Maseches Megillah on Daf Yud Daled. The context of this Gemara is quoting the 7 prophetesses. Is that a word? The female prophets that are recorded in the Tanakh. There are 7 such prophetesses, and one of them is indeed Esther. And the Gemara says, what is the indication that Esther was in fact a prophetess? So this is from chapter Hay of the Megillah, chapter 5. Vayhi bayom hashlishi, on the 3rd day, Esther had requested from Mordechai that he make a series of fasts in order to plead for her success in thwarting the plot of Haman. And on that 3rd day of consecutive fasting, Vatilbash Esther Malchus, she adorns her royal finery to go in and begin her speaking to the king. This was, the initial party that would it would only come to fruition later on that she would reveal Haman's plan. But this was the beginning of that process. Vayom hashlishi, on the 3rd day, Vatilbash Esther Malchus, she adorns her royal finery. Asked the Gemara, Big day Malchus mi ba'alei. The pasuk should have said she wore her clothes of kingship. It literally means she wore kingship. That's what those words mean. Vatilbash Esther Malchus. It should have said she wore her clothes of Malchus. Ela shelovshasa ruach hakodesh. But this is alluding to the fact that the Holy Spirit was clothed upon her. As it says, Hasam ruach lavsha es amoshai. In Divrei Hayamim, it describes when someone receives a type of premonition or a divine inspiration, rather. When someone receives that spirit of inspiration, it is described as being clothed in spirit. Lavsha es amoshai. Vatilbash Esther Malchus. She clothed herself in kingship, referring to this divine inspiration of being able to step up and do things above and beyond what seems to be possible, which is, as we know, what Esther described a few verses earlier to Mordechai. This is an impossible plan. It won't work. No one's allowed to enter the king's throne room without permission, etc., etc. But she stepped up and adorned herself in Malchus, not Bigdei Malchus, not the clothes of royalty, but Malchus itself, in kingship itself, with the inspiration to be able to step up and do things beyond the current capacity. That's called Malchus. That's called kingship. Kingship. What was achieved by the Jewish people in the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, of gaining sovereignty, of fighting, of conquering, emerging victorious, and gaining Malchus. Those circumstances no longer existed in the time of Esther. They were the opposite of those circumstances, the total opposite of those circumstances. However, the lesson of the Megillah is that regardless of the circumstances, those qualities are accessible and they are able to be expressed in whatever circumstances you happen to find yourself in. This Mishnah that we opened up with in Maseches Avos, Ben Zoma Omer, Ezu Chacham, who is wise? Ezu Ashir, Ezu Gibor, Ezu Mechubad, etc., etc. This Mishnah always bothered me tremendously, because on the surface it seems to be that it's not really true. You can ask bluntly. Someone who's rich. Chazal themselves have several contexts in which they describe very wealthy people, and that they had a lot of assets, and that they had a lot of money, and they were very successful in business, etc., etc. Ezu Chacham. That seemingly the answer to who is wise would be someone that has a lot of wisdom, has a lot of knowledge. That's considered a chacham. What are this idea that seem to be negating the traditional definition of these things and giving some other definition? It seems to be a nice idea. It's nice to be happy with what you have. It's nice to learn from all people. But to say that this is the definition of what a wise person is, or that this is the definition of what a rich person is, to understand this Mishnah, we have to flip the paradigm a little bit. Ben Zoma is not coming to give us standards of what a Chacham is, or standards of what a rich person is. This is not a Mishnah giving us standards. Rather, this is a Mishnah giving us, taking something that could be defined by standards and making them a quality. It's not the standard of wisdom, but it's the quality of wisdom. It's not the standard of wealth, but the quality of wealth. If a person wants to be wise, if a person wants to be wise and take that and make it a quality of who they are, this is how you do it. You want to make wisdom an aspect of who you are as a person. This is what you do. You make sure that you are attuned all the time to being able to gain insight and wisdom and knowledge from all the people you interact with. You want to make wealth a quality of who you are and not just dependent on how much money you happen to have at any given moment. This is the quality that you must inculcate, that you have to be sameach bechelkacha, that you have to rejoice. You have to rejoice, not saying that you have enough, that I'm okay with, I'm not yearning and aspiring for more. No, that you rejoice on what is there now. That mindset of abundance and joy in the richness that is before you, even if that richness is very minimal. That is the quality of wealth. This is the quality. It's making these things away. It's taking them away for a moment, just for a moment, to step away from the measuring stick, which is important, but to step away from it just for a moment and make it a quality as opposed to a standard. The quality. These are qualities. And what the secret of the Megillah is that all of the achievements of the Jewish people in the past that seemed to be dependent on external circumstances. Well, if we have sovereignty and we're in our land and everything is going well, then we have Malchus. And if not, then we don't. Right? Everything has been erased, everything has been undone. But the lesson of the Megillah is no, that's not true. These are qualities that have been emblazoned on the hearts and souls of each individual Jew and the collective heart and the collective soul of all the Jewish people. These are qualities that are there, that are expressed in whatever set of circumstances happen to be right now. And this is the idea of the throwback to Yehoshua ben Nun. That playing out the days of Yehoshua ben Nun, afal pi sha'ata heim charev, and even though the city right now is destroyed, it's in a state of desolation. But because it was a walled city at the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, it is a throwback to that time that that quality was achieved. Now it becomes an aspect of who we are and not just whatever circumstances we happen to have ourselves in. The Megillah is a acting out of the highest potentiality that the individual and the collective Jewish people are able to achieve, and honing in on this idea that we have those qualities and can express those qualities regardless of circumstances because they are who we are and not where we happen to be.